It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by AgileDad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I got another insightful email from my dear friend Mike Cohn, where we were discussing user stories. And are user stories the same as requirements? That's a good question. That question rings true for a lot of folks. So rather than thinking of a user story as a requirement, sometimes it's more useful to think of each story as a pointer towards a requirement. Most commonly, every story is a placeholder for a future conversation. I love that quote. Between the team and the stakeholders. During that conversation, stakeholders will convey the details about what exactly is needed. If more detail is needed that can be conveyed in a conversation, the story may point to a flow diagram, a sketch of the user interface, sample data, instructions on how to perform a calculation, or so on, whatever's necessary. A user story itself is too vague to be considered a requirement. You're better off thinking of a story as a pointer to a requirement. So then that begs the question, who writes acceptance criteria for a user story? Well, since the product owner is the one who will accept the story or not, the product owner needs to be the one who writes the acceptance criteria, also known as conditions for satisfaction. That's interesting. This does not mean that the product owner is forced to document a lengthy list of tests. The product owner documents only the acceptance criteria, those items so vital that the product owner will reject the product backlog item if it doesn't meet the full criteria. Acceptance criteria are higher level than test cases. Think of acceptance criteria as a table of contents into a test plan containing all the test cases. As an example, a product owner might give us an acceptance condition or criterion that the results of some search can be sorted by the user. It would be up to the rest of the team, likely testers or QA, to turn this into specific tests such as the following. The list is sorted by any column header the user clicks on. The list is sorted in ascending order the first time the header is clicked on. The list toggles between ascending and descending order on subsequent clicks, and so on. If the product owner would reject the item, if any of these are left out, the product owner can include that in the acceptance criteria. The key is that acceptance criteria includes only things so important that the product owner will reject any item if it's not met. That makes sense now. So what about writing acceptance criteria? I know there's 1,000 different ways to do that, right? I hear people all the time tell me, Lee, that's great, but what should acceptance criteria look like? Does it have a template? The most common way of writing a user story is with the familiar as a specific type of user. I would like for some goal or action to take place so that some reason or a goal could be achieved. This template provides details about who wants something, what they want, and why they want it. But it's the why that's included in a so that clause that's required when writing when writing user stories. You need to know the why. If you don't know why behind the what, you're going to be lost. So I want to stress that I think it's often the most important part of the user story, understanding the why, so that, right? Knowing why someone wants something can sometimes tell developers a better way to achieve the goal. A couple hours from now, for example, and this is Mike's example here. He says, "I'm flying home from in Idaho. I'm flying from my home in Idaho to Denver. I don't necessarily want to go to Denver on this trip. I want to go to Southern California, which is my final destination. There's a big difference between as a passenger, I want to fly to Denver, and as a passenger, I want to fly to Denver so I can reach my destination in Southern California." As another example, suppose you're building a robot vacuum cleaner, and someone gives you a user story such as a user, I want to train my robot to stay off the hardwood floors so the floors aren't damaged. The so that clause in this case suggests the users don't really want to train a robot. They prefer it just somehow knew what to do. So a better solution would be for the robot vacuum to have a mode where it stays off of any hardwood floor without training. A so that clause helps by making the user goal more clear. It is the so that clause that is the so that clause required? I mean, that's a good question. No, it's not required. There are times where it doesn't add any new information to the story. Consider this. As a member, I need to log in. Adding so that only I have access to the information doesn't add anything of value. So in this case, the so that clause may not be required, but you'll benefit from always considering a so that clause, and writing one a vast majority of the time helps in your user stories, right? So user stories are a great way to ensure your product backlog is focused on customer needs. But that doesn't mean stories are easy to master. Check out any resources, references, and there's lots of great information that you can see about how to write good stories or how to split features into stories or how to break down epics. There's so many different paths that you can choose to get this information. What I can assure you is whether you're contacting Mike and Mountain Goat Software to get this done, or whether you're contacting myself and the team at AgileDad to get this done, there are plenty of references out there that will help you get these things right size. The last thing I'll add about stories that makes it easier is if you remember the acronym INVEST from Bill Wake. He said that every story should be independent. We should avoid dependencies whenever possible. It should be negotiable. A story is not a contract. A story is a placeholder for a future conversation. We just had that, right? V is valuable. You want to make sure if the story doesn't provide value that you're not leaning into it. It should be estimable or estimable, because estimatable is not a word. Basically what that means is we have to be able to estimate the size or scope of what's being asked for. Not how long it's going to take, but the size or scope. The S means size appropriately, that we're breaking things down small enough so that they fit inside of a bite-sized sprint. And then, of course, the T is testable. If it's not testable, then why bother? And I think that if we follow that INVEST pattern, that's going to lead us down a path of writing very good user stories. That's going to do it for today. Thanks again, Mike, for that helpful email. Your emails are always so awesome. They help give insight, and I love to take one day a week and share what you shared with me. So if you have a topic you want to discuss, feel free to reach out to us. Learn more at AgileDad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.